So the question on the floor is, what are you going to do with Jesus Christ Christmas? The child was born. That's history. The son was given because that came from eternity. Through the virgin birth, God became a man. Because he's God, he can meet you as God. Because he's a man, he knows exactly how you feel and what you're going through. The struggle, the stress. He became a man so that he could experience it, but as God, he can join you in it.
Merry, Merry Christmas to you all. We celebrate the reason for the season, which is Jesus Christ. God become a man, the incarnation, in order to bring about salvation, the forgiveness of sin, and hope, in spite of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. When Jesus was born, things weren't all well in the world, but yet the angels still broke out a praise, because in the middle of the madness, a Savior has arrived. And that means in the middle of your conflicts and crises, there is a Savior that has arrived. I know that Christmas can be a difficult time of loss, a difficult time of conflict, a difficult time of loneliness for many. But this Christmas, Jesus wants to meet you where you are and show you there is a reason for your season and him being in the midst of it. So may God empower and comfort you this holiday season. Merry Christmas. And remember, the baby born in a manger is the king who rules for you today.
In the movie Concussion, where Will Smith was dealing with the issue of injuries to players, there's a riveting statement that's made. And the statement was that football had replaced a day that used to belong to the church. That it had become the dominant focus of Sunday. This ball, how could something this small matter so much? I mean, it's responsible for $17 billion a year of revenue to the NFL. 32 teams whose worth is over $75 billion. Worship centers called stadiums are packed to the brim every week with home viewers watching it virtually. Some 400 million people inside and outside of the United States focus on this. How could something so small, how could it matter so much? I mean, think about it. Men fight over it. They cry over it. They're willing to risk their health over it. They spend decades developing the skill in handling it. I mean, each football game has about 17 minutes of contact. 17 minutes of where bodies are actually clashing against each other. That's part of a 1-hour game. But that 1-hour game is a 3-hour experience. So you sit for 3 hours to watch 1 hour because you're going to just watch 17 minutes. Well, now, if you go to the game, that's a couple more hours by the time you drive, traffic, get out, walk. 5 hours where you're sitting 3 hours because you want to watch 1 hour because you're only going to see 17 minutes worth of action. Then you got to drive home, so you got to leave the stadium, deal with the crowd, get to the parking lot, work through the traffic. You get home, so now 7 hours, of which you set 3 hours, to watch 1 hour because you're only going to see 17 minutes. I mean, people tithe to get into their service. And they don't mind picking up the tab because they've decided that this is worth the inconvenience. So I ask you again, how can something so small matter so much? We are celebrating Christmas. We're celebrating the birth of a person not much bigger than this. And I ask you, how can something so small matter so much? I mean, he never wrote a song, yet more songs are sung about him than any other person who has ever lived. He never personally penned a book, yet his book has been the bestseller since its inception. He never traveled more than 300 miles from the place of his birth, and yet there's hardly anywhere on earth you can go where they don't know his name. Let's see what Isaiah says about this baby born to rule. He says in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, "For a child will be born to us, and a son will be given, and the government will rest on his shoulders. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness. From then on and forever, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this." He says, a child will be born and a son will be given. Don't read that too fast or you'll miss it. The child was born, but the son was given, because the son existed before the child was born. The son was handed, the child was birthed. The big word for that in Christian theology is the hypostatic union. Two natures in one person, unmixed forever. Deity being poured into humanity. The one-of-a-kind Son of God. And he says, and he's here to run a government and to inaugurate a kingdom. This baby was born to rule. It says that the government will be on his shoulders. Jesus has been smothered by the secularization of the holiday. He's been smothered by eggnog. He's been smothered by gifts. He's been smothered by trees. He's been smothered by lights. And he's also been demonized, as some segments of our society don't want the nativity scenes. They don't even want Christ in Christmas. They just want to get off of work for a holiday. But Isaiah says that there would be a son that would be handed over, and it would come through a child that would be born. We call that the virgin birth. God entering into the egg of a woman, producing the God-man, Jesus Christ. And it says his government will be governed because he will handle it on his shoulders. In other words, this ruler, this baby who is sent to rule, will handle anything that's on his shoulders. So if you want your world ruled well, you better be on the shoulders that he's carrying, because that's the kind of king he is. And so over and over he says in these verses that this child born and son given is about government, and government is about rule. And that's why he says it's a kingdom issue, and his kingdom shall never end. So let me ask you a question today, this Christmas, where I'm sure you'll get your full of football and you'll see how this one thing can matter so much. What about this one who was born to rule? When Jesus Christ governs, Isaiah says, this is what you'll get. The first thing he says is that his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Chief Advisor. In other words, you don't have to live a confused life. Because he's not a counselor, he's the best at it. He's a wonderful counselor, means he makes no mistakes in his advice. You can bank on what he says to be true on anything he says because he cannot be incorrect on any matter. As Colossians chapter 2 verse 3 says, all the hidden treasures of wisdom and knowledge are located in Jesus Christ. So if you allow him to be your ruler, your government, and your king, and you rest on his governmental shoulders, then the confusion of your life can be now ordered. The problem with human counseling is that it is limited by flawed people who give it. And even the best and the most well-meaning cannot dive into the inner circle of all of your being. But I know somebody who, if you allow his government to put you on his shoulders, can erase the confusion of your life, bring clarity to your existence. He can take the lack of clarity, the bad decisions, the frustrated history, reorient it, reorganize it so that it makes sense. Because he's a mighty counselor, awesome counselor. He says his name will also be called Mighty God. Remember, this baby is deity in diapers. He's a king in a crib. He is mighty God, Emmanuel, God with us. I said it last time, let me say it again. He's the God man. 1 minute he can get hungry, the next minute he can feed 5,000 with a Moby Dick sandwich. 1 minute he can get thirsty because he's human, the next minute he can walk on water because he's divine. 1 minute he's tired and he has to sleep. The next minute he can raise somebody else from the dead. 1 minute because he's a man he can die, the next minute 3 days later he can get up. Because he's mighty God. Now let's collect that with wonderful counselor. When you go to a good counselor who gives you good advice, they typically don't have the ability to pull off what they've advised you to do. But this mighty God can assist with the counsel he gives. So he doesn't just give wonderful counseling. He's the mighty God that can enable the counseling to have the effect it's designed to have. That is, if you're situated on his shoulders. If he's your government. Because after all, he was born to rule. You know the wonderful thing about this mighty God? He can overrule what is overruling you. Satan has been overruling you. Circumstances have been overruling you. People have been overruling you. Problems have been overruling you. But this is mighty God. And he can overrule the overrulers. So the beautiful thing about having Jesus, who was born to rule, ruling you, is he can overrule the things that you don't want ruling you anymore. That addiction, that problem, that person, that circumstance, that need that is dictating your existence. How can something so small be this big? Because he's mighty God. But not only that, he goes on to say His name will be called Eternal Father. In other words, the originator of time. He's the Father of time. Book of Hebrews chapter 1 says that Jesus originated time. He's the author of history. In the beginning was the Word. John 1:1 says Jesus is the Word. So he brought about the beginning. So if you bring about the beginning, you existed before it began. He is the Father of time. Which means if you're in charge of time, you're not complex. Because if you own time and you manage history, then the complexity of our time and our history does not belong to him. So you better be letting him rule, since he's got time in his hands. He's the originator, sustainer, and will be the culminator of time. What about if he was ruling the time in your hands? Our time is limited, our time is finite, and our time is uncertain. But this one who was born to rule, see, he is the manager, owner, originator of time. So that means somebody else's clock doesn't have to control your clock. Somebody else's existence doesn't have to control your existence, because he is in charge of time. He is the father of it. So there's no complexity with him. But not only that, he goes on to say, he's the Prince of Peace. 3 hours every Sunday, there's a conflict, isn't it? Teams are at war with one another. They are fighting. But he's called the Prince of Peace. In other words, he knows how to bring order out of a chaotic situation. Today, we are living in chaos. We have personal chaos where people can't live with themselves. And if you can't live with you, anybody around you is in trouble. We've got family chaos, don't we? Conflict, brutality, child abuse, divorce, abandonment. We've got ecclesiastical conflict, where even Christians are at each other's throats or divided illegitimately over class or race. Then we have cultural conflict. Oh, and that's everywhere. Political conflict, social conflict, group against group, nation against nation, communities against communities. There's conflict. You know why there's conflict? Because we're not on his shoulders. He's carrying it on his shoulders. And if you don't want to be on his shoulders, then you can expect to be living in conflict, starting with conflict with you. Have you ever seen an orchestra before they begin and they're warming up their instruments? They're warming up their instruments and all you hear is discord, because everybody's warming up their own instrument. So you hear discord all over the place. It's discord all over the place. Nothing is making sense. They're not harmonized. They're not getting along because they are doing their own thing. And then in the midst of all of that, the conductor comes out with the wand and pop, 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 pop. And all of a sudden, things become orderly. Harmony is now replacing discontinuity and discord. Because now the conductor has come out, and when he shows up, he changes the atmosphere. And now things that weren't binding and blending are now being harmonized because they're focused on the central authority. Because the conductor is going to rule the orchestra. Jesus said in John 16:33, in this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world, and I leave my peace with you. Peace is not the fact that there are no conflicts. Peace is God showing up in the midst of the conflict and calming the storms of your life. Because how can something this small be this big? Because he is the wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and he is the Prince of Peace. And if one day he's going to govern the whole world, don't you think he can govern your world? If one day he's going to rule the whole world, don't you think he can rule you? The Bible says when he physically returns to earth from coast to coast, kiver to kiver, pillar to pillar, post to post, he is going to run the whole show, and there will be no choices. He's offering that to you and me and us now. Because he was born to rule. He is the unifier, the emulsifier. Emulsification is that process of bringing things together that typically can't get along, like oil and water. Whenever I eat my sandwiches, they will always be with mayonnaise. I'm not a mustard guy, I'm a mayonnaise guy. But mayonnaise is made of substance that really doesn't get along, or there's a lot of oil and water in mayonnaise, and no matter how much you try to force them to be harmonized, they're just not going to get along. They're going to go back to their own corners. That is until you introduce egg. Because once you introduce egg, egg grabs water, egg grabs oil, and pulls the two together so I can get my mayonnaise. Jesus Christ is the emulsifier for the conflicts in our world, in our families, and in your life. And if you let him rule, if you let him be the government on whose shoulders you sit, he can be the one to bring things together in you and for you that you have not been able to fix on your own. But he's got to be the ruler. He's not just the person you show up to. He's the person who wants to set the agenda. So the question on the floor is, what are you going to do with Jesus Christ Christmas? The child was born. That's history. The son was given because that came from eternity. And through the virgin birth, God became a man. Because he's God, he can meet you as God. Because he's a man, he knows exactly how you feel and what you're going through. God became a man so that he could know the pain. Without sin, yes, but not without circumstances. And he became a man so that he could experience it, but as God, he can join you in it. But he wants to rule. So where do we start? We start with a personal relationship. He can't rule you if he doesn't have you.